Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander Horat. And today we are joined by Ryan Gable. Hello, Ryan.
Howdy there. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being on the show. So, I'd like to introduce Ryan for the audience. So, Ryan Gable is an accomplished broadcaster, author, and host of the Secret Teachings podcast and radio show with over 15 years of thought-provoking content. Drawing inspiration from Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages, the program explores a sophisticated array of topics, including parapolitics, occult studies, paranormal phenomenon, symbolism, anthropology, and health. So I think that's great that you come on the show, Ryan. And I was wondering if you can tell the audience why you named your show after Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Yeah, sure thing. So when I first began radio, I was actually a co-host on another show. And in the process of transitioning to my own show, because that host, who was a friend of mine, unfortunately passed away, I ended up sitting by myself and trying to figure out, because I had no radio experience, I sat by myself and tried to figure out, what do I do here? Do I keep doing this radio show or do I just quit? And I decided to keep doing it. And I'm sitting looking at my books, and I decided to name it The Secret Teachings because I thought, oh, this is the most inspirational book I've read, and it's one of the most all-encompassing books I've read. So that's why I chose it. And it's a little bit of a mouthful. I don't know if it rolls off the tongue, but for people that know Manly Hall, The Secret Teachings rings true to them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Can you tell the audience some of your favorite parts of the book?
The cryptology section always stood out to me. It wasn't my favorite, but it always stood out to me as being interesting, to say the least. But I think the entire book from start to finish is, maybe that's a cliche thing to say, but the entire book from start to finish is really powerful. It's probably one of the most comprehensive occult books ever written. There are a handful of others, of course, that maybe go into a little bit more detail. Maybe Cornelius Agrippa, for example, and some others. But I think The Secret Teachings of All Ages overall as a text is kind of like a neutral, comprehensive guide to all things mythological, all things occult. And you find, which is my favorite subject matter, is like mixing symbols and mythology and theology. And from start to finish in that book, especially in the first few chapters, Manly Hall does that expertly. He weaves all of this together from start to finish. So I'd say the underlying theme is symbolism and understanding myths and theology, understanding what we call the occult, which just means those things which are hidden and not fully understood by the mass majority of people. So that's really what intrigues me about the book.
Yeah, could you tell the audience, for people who haven't heard much of the occult, some occult subjects that you've been working on?
Yeah, the occult, as I just said, is a word that means that which is hidden. It's unfortunate that there are large segments of the population who are very religious, who find that word to be very offensive or find it to be even insulting or sacrilege. I just find it strange because if I go to a dictionary, the word just means what I said it means. It doesn't have any nefarious overtones. Although I think perhaps the reason that is the case, it does have this nefarious feel to it for some people, is because a lot of bad people, a lot of bad things are done in the dark. They're done undercover. So we just assume if someone's doing something in secret, then it must be an evil thing. So anyway, the occult basically is that which is hidden. So I like to take symbolism and mythology and things like that and apply it to current events. I can give you a good example of that. I don't know if you recall the. This is where things get maybe a little complicated, but I don't know if you recall the story of George Floyd being buried in a golden coffin. You remember that in the news?
No, I don't remember that.
So whatever people might think of George Floyd, the whole story and his death and whatnot is really an irrelevancy. This is where controversy comes in with my show because it might sound political, but when George Floyd was buried, he was buried in a golden coffin. And this is, I think, one of the better examples I can give of what my show is and what the occult is. Because in mythology, there's a story in Egypt, a very famous story of a god who's known as the Green Man. They call him Osiris. He's a god of agriculture,
Yeah.
but he's also known as the Black God because black fertile soil is the soil that you need to grow crops. and which is the Green Man. So he's both black and green. And if you look at the story of George Floyd, it doesn't matter what people think about him or the politics of the whole thing. It's just this fact that you have a guy who doesn't really have any background that isn't criminal, and they take him and they turn him into a saint. Some people actually called him Saint George Floyd. They painted pictures and murals of him with crowns and with halos. And the point is, they took an ordinary man and they turned him into a god, and then they buried him in a golden coffin. This is literally the story of Osiris in Egypt, a black god who was transformed into this ritual process, who was transformed into something else through the afterlife. He's one of the gods of the underworld. And when he was buried in a golden coffin. So when you find the myths that relate to current events, I don't personally know or claim to have the answer to why these things are the way that they are, but there's a strange connection between contemporary political events as well, but just contemporary things that we see in the world and these ancient myths. Clearly, it's a part of probably underlying mystery traditions, mystery schools, mystery religions, which are very much still practiced today. I just don't think things like that are a coincidence. But that's an example, I would say, of the occult. And it's certainly one that you don't have to go back into history and read like old grimoires to understand it. It's something that we've all probably been subject to seeing these stories in the media, like George Floyd, for example. And then we see, okay, he's buried in a golden coffin. That's the Osiris story. What does that mean? I have my own opinions, but I really don't have a conclusive answer,
What are your
except,
opinions?
except that is the occult. My opinion of that particular case, I think it's a very complicated question and answer, but I think that it has something to do with what I just alluded to. I think that there are people that are in positions of power. We've heard this in the music industry, especially, and we've heard this in the entertainment industry in general. You've seen a little hint of it with Jeffrey Epstein and people like P. Diddy. There are powerful people who, whether or not it's real in like a physical sense or it's just a mindset, they engage in actions that would be considered not just cult like or quote occult like, but that some people probably would call satanic. They
Yeah.
do sacrifice animals or people. They do things that are, for lack of a better word, satanic, that are very anti-human, anti-life. There's a lot of, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking there's probably a lot of various religious-like practices, and I think that doing these things publicly probably draws in the attention and the energy of the public to get people fighting over, is George Floyd a hero? Is he a criminal? And people just fight back. Just like with the shooting in Minneapolis recently, people just fighting over guns or fighting over, the transgenderism or whatever it is. We just fight, and all that energy is part of the ritual. It's like the chanting and the hyperventilating, and I think that empowers the symbols that these people are working with. It's just a thought. I really don't know. I'm an expert at pointing it out. I don't know what it means though necessarily.
So you think this fighting is feeding their god, this symbolism that they need to have?
In a sense, yeah. In a sense, I'm
Wow.
not absolutist about it, but I think in a sense, yes, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, so this George Floyd thing. So what do you think of all the riots that happened after that and all those things?
I think that's part of it. And in fact, I doubt that you intended to talk about this particular subject on the show, but it's interesting because it takes us to a lot of different areas, a lot of different subjects, a lot of different topics. I don't know if you recall this, but people were chanting and they were holding up signs that said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Right, yeah.
Remember that? And at the same time, my memory's a little rusty in terms of the exact date, but it was in like a few weeks of his death and the people that were chanting that, and we got the mask mandates across the United States. And that, of course, what was the big complaint about masks? They were uncomfortable and people couldn't breathe. So it's like we transition from this weird Egyptian ritual with the golden coffin to, and I can't breathe riots or protests or whatever they called them, to mask mandates and literally being muzzled and people having trouble breathing. Again, I don't know what that means, but it's really, really weird. We would call that, it's almost like Twilight language, where there's like a double or a triple meaning to it. Like that, remember that submarine that was going down to see the Titanic and it imploded?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And remember it was CNN, all these other news networks, they were running uh, basically 24-hour coverage for a few days about it. And they were doing this constant update about if the submarine was still active, if it didn't implode, how much oxygen would they have left? How much air would they have left? And that was like the segment that CNN and others were doing. But while they were doing that, they were doing it on air. So they were doing these on air checks about how much air these people had in the submarine. It's little things like that. Another good example is you see, and there's tons of these examples, but another good example is the crypto scammer Sam Bankman,
Oh,
who, remember, this guy was one of the biggest contributors to the Democrat Party, and here's a guy who literally ripped people off, scammed people. He was part of a much larger apparatus, but his name was Bankman. It's
yeah.
even Andrew Kaufman, who I had on my radio show during the quote pandemic. I mean, one of the biggest doctors who talked about the pandemic was Kaufman. Just weird little things like that. We call that Twilight language. It's like it's real, but it's not real. It's kind of in between. It's in the Twilight zone. Again, I don't know what it means. It's just very strange.
Yeah, it does seem pretty strange, this Twilight language and all the stuff you've been talking about. So you think the whole pandemic and the mask things was part of a ritual?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that's not even my opinion. I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine 2021. It's 2020 or 2021. You could look it up. The New England Journal of Medicine actually reported, this is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. If you're going to look it up, type in New England Journal of Medicine masks, magical talismans. And the New England Journal of Medicine actually says that in the journal. They say that masks serve a symbolic role, but ultimately they are talismans. They are magical instruments to make people feel a certain way. That's how the New England Journal of Medicine described it. So it is quite literally ritualistic. In fact, the entire process of masking people and putting all of our trust and faith into doctors with white lab coats, maybe like black robes or some other sort of ritualistic garb, and then having shots which come in little syringes that we put into vials. This is no different than the practice of exorcism. In an exorcism, you have to identify the demon or the spirit that possesses somebody. Once you have that identification, you can use the name to control and compel the demon or the spirit. And in a classical exorcism, you would have a bottle of or a vial of holy water, and you would have usually a cross, and you would utilize those things to help with the name compel the spirit or this demon to leave. This is exactly what modern medicine is. Modern medicine is the lab coat, the mask, and then we have this syringe, which has with the plunger, you have the place where you put your fingers. It's basically a cross. We put it into a vial of holy water, quote, inoculation, and then we put that into the body, and we know the name of the disease. It's COVID or it's whatever the variation is, and then we tell the disease to leave. It's a modern form of magical ritualistic practice, and I think in probably 50 to 100 years, we'll look back on it and think, well, that was really primitive. And there'll probably be a book written like Fraser's Golden Bow about these weird practices that people used to do in the 21st century that don't really make any sense to people 200, 300 years from now. It's very similar, though.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would like to share my screen to show your website. So you actually wrote a book called Food Philosophy, and I really think health is very important for people. So I was just wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about your book and some of your findings.
It's one of 5 books I've written, and it is a book that is, I don't really promote it or sell it a lot even. It's just kind of like one of the lower end books that I have because it's not a comprehensive book, but the book itself is just supposed to help people to understand how to read labels, which again, that in and of itself is kind of occult, because of the way that labels are placed on the back of the packages, and sometimes they're broken up and they're intentionally designed. They legally have to be there, but they're intentionally designed to mislead the public. So it kind of teaches people how to do that and points out some very simple but probably not well known things that are free, uh, that you don't need to go to a doctor or go to the store or some health food store to at least start thinking about how to be a little healthier, you know, like taking a walk, getting some sunlight, sleeping more, drinking water, basic things like that.
Oh, that's great. So I was wanting to move on to some geopolitical events.
Mm.
So we see that just saw an SCO meeting with Xi, Putin, and Modi, among others. What do you think about that event that just happened recently?
Oh, yeah, I did a show on that a few days ago.
Yeah,
And my assessment of it is that the United States pushed the Russians further and further east and pushed them into the bosom of China. And I think in a lot of ways, we've even isolated ourselves from what could be potentially decent relations with China. You notice that in the United States, especially the Republican Party consistently, constantly just obsesses over China, 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 China.
all
And
right.
the Democrats do the same thing with Russia. Russia, 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 Russia. Russia's the enemy. China's the enemy. Russia's the enemy. China. This
Yeah,
gets really annoying, and it doesn't really make any sense to me. I mean, the point is though, we've kind of created that situation in the same way that we created. Um, Ron Paul used to talk about this. Former Congressman Ron Paul used to talk about the blowback that we created in mostly Arab nations and throughout the Middle East, and how after 9/11, I mean, I frankly don't believe Muslims or Islam had anything to do with 9/11. That's a whole different subject. But a lot of people were really confused in America. Why would somebody hate us? Why would somebody attack the United States? Why would some because Americans were really just completely oblivious to what the country had, or at least what people had done in the country's name, um,
yeah,
especially throughout the 90s. And so I think in the same way that we create that blowback, we've created the situation that the question that you're asking, we've created that situation with Russia. We've lied to Russia. We've broken agreements with Russia. Not that they're, it's not like Russia's better than us. It's just that we've done a lot of really bad stuff. And it's amazing that Russia and China haven't become even more unstable in response to that. They keep saying Putin's this crazy wacko guy. It seems like he's a pretty stable force in the region. It seems like if I was Putin, the stuff that had been done to me, I don't know if I would have the same kind of restraint as the president of a country. So it doesn't make me a fan of Russia or China. It just I'm just trying to be a realist about it. I think that we've created a lot of blowback by tampering with governments, overthrowing leaders, destroying cultures. And I think, and that's not an anti American statement, it's just a factual statement.
yeah,
And I think we've done the same thing in Russia and China. And I think ultimately there is a larger plan. It's not a giant global conspiracy, but I think the plan is to create the conditions for what you're asking about with well, India's involved too. A bunch of other countries are involved, but to create those conditions mixed with the conditions of virtually the entire world now agreeing that something has to be done about Israel. And I think that the whole world is going to gang up and team up in one alliance or another. And Israel's going to get their Armageddon like war. And they expect the United States to defend them from multiple different countries all coming together in alliance. I think that's really what I think they're setting it up for for kind of like an artificial, I call it an artificial Armageddon. Because Armageddon, if you define the word, we're talking about metaphors and symbols.
yeah.
But I think they're creating the optics of like an actual Armageddon, like Russia and China and the whole world gangs up on the US and Israel, and God has to support us and help us, and we'll win in the end. I think that's what it's leading to. That's just my assessment.
When do you think that'll happen?
No idea. I mean, I think it's in the process of unfolding, and I think it has to happen sooner than later. I don't think it's like an absolute date or like an event that happens one day when we wake up. I think it's like an ongoing process where the optics of these things are created over many years. And I think that the power that Israel has to influence and to drive the United States into to war, first and foremost, I think that's going to eventually wane. It's already waning, and I think that they have a very limited window by which to create those conditions because I think the next generation is, for one reason or another, opposed to Israel, and they don't want to have it. They don't want to support it anymore. A lot of that's because of the like anti-colonialism, anti-American viewpoint, which is not my viewpoint. But I think that it has to happen sooner than later for those conditions to be met. I mean, it also depends on if they're going to officially sacrifice a red heifer and try to rebuild the third temple and create those optics to start direct. It would create start a direct war with the entirety of the Islamic world,
That's true.
um, which is what Hegseth wants anyway. The Secretary of Defense or War or whatever they're calling it now, Pete Hegseth, is he literally wrote a book about crusades. He's like a Christian crusader who wants to exterminate the entirety of the Muslim world. He's a complete psychopath.
Yeah.
Wants war. So I suspect that a larger war is coming. Just probably won't happen the way we think it will.
How do you think they'll go about destroying the Muslim mosque on the over there and building a third temple?
I have no idea. No idea.
Okay.
Know
Well,
that I know that Islam and the Muslims aren't going to destroy any part of the Holy Land. I think that's an absurd piece of propaganda.
yeah.
I know that for sure, but I don't know how that's going to go down.
Yeah, so I guess as long as we're on the subject of Israel, so what do you think of what's going on in Gaza right now?
I think the most incredible thing is that for 15 years that I've done radio, I've talked about that. And then
Yeah,
suddenly, just like 2 years ago, people are like, well, this just started in 2023.
right.
I'm amazed that people that are like twice my age think that. I'm amazed that people genuinely think that this stuff just started a few days ago or something. That it didn't start back in the 100 years ago, roughly a little under 100 years ago. But I I don't support either viewpoint. I don't hate Israel because they're quote colonial. I don't hate Israel because they're quote stealing the land of the indigenous people. And I don't hate Israel because of whatever the Democrats believe. I'm not aligned with Islam, which they appear to be, but I'm also not a supporter of Israel and I'm also not a supporter of Jewish supremacy. And it just gets really tiring and to have to defend a neutral point on these types of things.
How do you think they could fix the problem with all these conflicts going on in Israel? Do you think there's a solution, or do you think they're just going to continue to fight?
It's a very complex question. I don't know if I could answer that in any short amount of time. I mean, ultimately, in my opinion, Israel itself, the Israeli government, is the problem. They brought terrorism to the area, to the region. They've done that for close to 100 years. The Israeli government is responsible for, along with the U.S. government, the CIA, the Mossad, and let's not forget the British as well, who gave them the territory, which was never good enough for the Zionists. So they started killing British officials and soldiers. In fact, the British government had to put out a statement or several statements urging Jewish people to stand up against the radicals in their community and stop them from killing British soldiers back. And this was back in the early 40s. But they brought terrorism to the region. They've created, for the most part, created most of the radical Islamic groups. They've armed them, they funded them, and that's not just Hamas. They've done it to ISIS. Um, I mean, Al Qaeda was famously our CIA. So, I mean, Israel and the radical religious zealots, not just the Jewish ones, the Christian ones too, and the Muslim ones as well. Um, these are the problems. And I think that the Israeli government is the problem. But they like being the problem. This is part of the problem. They like being the problem because the more that the world hates them, the more it justifies the belief that they are chosen and special, and the more it justifies their actions, whatever those actions, however horrible those actions might be, they want the world to team up and gang up against them because that fulfills the literal interpretation of prophecy. So I think that until either the Jews of Israel rise up against and get control of their government, I don't think anything's going to change. I think it's going to remain the same, or the United States decides to stop subsidizing the conflicts, which you've got a better chance of the Jews rising up against their government than you do the U.S. to stop financing it, because ultimately the U.S. sees Israel as a military base outside of the religious zealotry. It's a military base. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. So you said earlier that you think they want to put us in a big Armageddon war. So why do you think the elites are wanting this plan? What do you think is driving them to this, wanting this disaster to happen?
It's a lot of interpretations. I don't have the exact answer. In my opinion, though, I think that there are 4+ billion people on planet Earth. Don't know the exact number, but it's over 4 billion. It's half the world who believes in Armageddon and the final battle, the apocalypse, which is a slightly different uh, term, and people that believe in the rise of the Antichrist, the coming of the Messiah. And by 4 billion, I mean Christians and Muslims. They
Yeah.
believe in those things. I've always thought, now the Albert Pike letter about the Third World War is a fake letter. It's not real, but it is interesting that the letter indicates that the entire world will be overcome by nihilists and what ultimately I guess he terms, or whoever wrote that letter terms, Luciferianism, Satanism, total chaos and anarchy. And we kind of are seeing that with the immigration issues all over the world, including over here in Japan, where I am. It's a whole nother story, but it's a global international thing where radical groups are being used as weapons to destabilize countries, which is definitely a part of this. And if you read that letter, again, it's not a real letter, but if you whatever that was, you read that paper and it talks about a third world war and destroying people's faith in their religions. And what better way to destroy people's faith in their religions completely and to dismantle the global religious orders and to establish a one world global government, or a one world religion at the very least, would be to create the conditions where the Christians in particular and the Muslims in particular believe that these are the end times and that their respective messiahs will arrive, or the Antichrist will arrive. The Muslims believe Al Dajjal will be the Antichrist. It's the same Antichrist as the Christians believe. It's just a different language. And when that doesn't happen, or when maybe the Antichrist does come to power, quote unquote, and when Jesus doesn't return to save the Christians, well, you're going to have a lot of Christians that are going to be really confused that Jesus didn't come to save them. And the Muslims, they're not going to have a Messiah that saves them either. And I think a lot of people might lose faith. And that might be the trigger for the establishment of a new religious order. It's just a thought, it's just an assessment, not only based on that quote unquote Albert Pike letter, but based on the conditions that we see. I mean, for example, even over here in Japan, like I said, I'll give you one more quick example.
Yeah.
Um, the United Nations, this is where we get into the weeds a little bit. The United Nations Immigration Department and the IOM, which is their like migration, their main migration office, which is run by Amy Pope. Amy Pope is like, she's one of the strangest people I've ever read about. She grew up a Christian conservative, but she says she's inspired to bring people from other countries who are not developed, countries that are not developed, to countries like Japan that are very developed.
Right.
She says that the reason, this is her wording, it's not mine. The reason for this is because of Auschwitz. It's just like you try like wrap your head. I don't know what the f
It's
that
because of
means.
Auschwitz.
Yeah, she had a neighbor who was a survivor of Auschwitz, and so she decided, let's bring a bunch of Africans to Japan. It's very weird. But you see that this pattern of the point is you see this pattern because the UN, I believe it's the UNHCR, uh, they also have an agreement with Israel to do the exact same thing. And then there's also independent groups over here in Japan. One of them is the Intercultural Group, and they're run by an Israeli Jew who wants to do the same thing, just bring people from Africa, not like educated people, but wants to bring uneducated people to one of the most educated countries in the world, just let them run free.
Yeah.
So when you see multiple organizations at an international level utilizing people as weapons to undermine culture, and they're all Jewish. And then you see the same thing with the Hebrew International um, or the Hebrew International Aid Society, HIAS. You see them doing that in Europe. The only conclusion I can come to is that there is a Jewish conspiracy to undermine the faith in Christianity and Islam and to destroy people's trust in society. And people can scoff at such an idea, but to radical Jews, they literally believe that in order to bring about their Messiah, they have to create these conditions and destroy what is considered Western civilization. If people don't believe that, you don't have to believe what I'm saying, and not all Jews believe that, but the radical ones do. The Zionists do. They believe that in order for the Messiah to come and save them, they have to destroy what is called Edom, EDOM. They have to destroy, at one point it was Rome, now it's the Western world or civilization as a whole. So you read about that and learn about that. And how are they doing this? They're doing it through Islam, which is like one of the largest religions in the world. They're doing this through cultural clashes. And it's not like a solely, quote, Jewish conspiracy. It's just the same old New World Order conspiracy that we've heard about our entire lives. And there's different fragments and branches of it. The World Economic Forum is part of that, although they got Larry Fink running that now. Um, anyway, back to the point, I think that that's the reason that these conditions are being created because there's a lot of prophecy involved and there's a lot of people that want to create that prophecy because in the end, they believe they'll win or they'll be saved, even if that means destroying the entire world. It's really crazy stuff, and there are a lot of different branches of it, but that's my assessment of what is happening.
That is pretty crazy. So yeah, we definitely see a lot of immigration in Europe and the United States and as you said, even Japan. Do you think the countries like India, China, and Russia are doing the same thing, or they're not allowing that to happen?
I don't know the conditions in China or Russia. I don't think Russia is doing or allowing for the same types of things to happen like Europe is. China, whether they are or not, I don't trust anything that I hear about China, what comes out of China.
Right.
I do know that China does not like the same types of things that these people push in the West. I'm pretty sure that Russia's the same way, and I'm thinking along the lines of um, LGBTQ as a movement or whatever that movement is. I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think Russia likes that. I don't think China likes that. In fact, I don't even really think much of Japan likes that. But I think they're pretty opposed to those things. But ultimately, it doesn't. I mean, those are just like little cultural issues that are almost irrelevant because if you think about it, you can look this up if you don't believe me. It sounds totally crazy, but where does China get most of their, or a lot, at least a lot, not maybe not most, but a lot of their military technology? Chinese are really smart, but they don't develop all that technology. Like that parade that they just had with Russia,
Right.
where did all that come from? I'm sure that China developed a lot of it, but a lot of that technology came from the United States. And you know how China gets that technology? They get it from Israel. Israel steals US military technology and then gives it to the Chinese. So the Chinese might not
Right.
agree with what the Israelis believe or do. I mean, Tel Aviv is the gayest place on earth, the capital of LGBTQ. But if they can undermine the United States, then China probably doesn't really care about it too much. And then on top of that, China then arms Iran, which then the US is told, oh, they want to destroy Israel. Now we have to go to war with Iran. It's like, well, Iran got the weapons from China, which got them from Israel, which got them from the US or the technology or whatever it is. The same thing with the drug cartels in South Central America. Where do they get a lot of their weapons from? Where do they get their training from? Who trained El Chapo how to dispose of bodies? It's the IDF.
Yeah.
They've been doing that since at least the 80s. They train Colombian death squads on how to kill people better. That's how vile the Israeli military people are. They train. It's crazy when I read that in the LA Times back in the 80s. They literally train cartel death squads. They're like, you're not killing good enough. Here's a better way to kill. It's really crazy. So it's on both sides of the world. They give our tech to China and they arm all the drug cartels now we're at war with those drug cartels. But in the middle of all this is Israel, and we still call them our greatest ally. Doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. So why do you think there's so many countries promoting the LGBTQ movement? So what do you think it's up with that? And you said Israel's the capital of that?
Look it up. Yes, it's hard to believe, but if you type into any internet search engine,
Yeah,
you can find travel websites where they make it like an LGBTQ travel destination. You can find mainstream news articles. I'm thinking of one article from the Boston Globe, for example. Um, but there's a bunch of evidence on this. It's like it's overwhelming. Tel Aviv is considered the gayest place in the world. It's considered the LGBTQ capital of the world. And like, frankly, I don't care if you're gay. That doesn't matter to me.
yeah,
But you can weaponize those things too. And that's what it is. It's the weaponization of sexuality. It's the weaponization of gender. And it's doing those types of things, convincing young people who have no context of these types of things or fringe ideas. Like we just all the time we hear new words about sexuality. Like people, it started off with like things like pansexual, and we heard those types of terms, and then it transformed into things that are like you just made that word up right now. That word doesn't exist. It makes no sense, but it's some new philosophy. And the point is, though, most of these philosophies, this is all very verifiable. The feminist movement, the LGBTQ movement, the quote, transgender movement, I guess if you could call it that, all of these movements are, it's crazily verifiable. They're all Jewish, all of them. As a matter of fact, I learned this from Jewish websites and Jewish newspapers, going back to the thing about Tel Aviv being the capital of all of this. I learned about all of this like Betty Friedman and Shulamith Firestone and Robin Morgan and Gloria Steinman, and the list goes on and on and on. They're all Jewish feminists. And that's part of what we were talking about with Edom, too, because this is the plan, like with Black Lives Matter, which was also a Jewish movement. They took out ads in the New York Times to say this is a Jewish movement. We support Black Lives Matter, etc. Um, it's to this like Black Lives Matter slogan. They wanted to destroy the nuclear family structure. They
yeah.
wanted to destroy all family values. And this is what these, from feminism to LGBTQ, they exploit people that truly are just, they're homosexual, whatever, and they want to just be a human. And they exploit that and weaponize that. In the same way that there are plenty of Jews that speak out against what the IDF does, they choose to go to jail instead of serve in the IDF, and they get treated worse than, quote, Goyim do. They get treated like they're third class citizens, not even second class citizens. So the point is, if you track and trace all this stuff back with LGBTQ, I don't know if you know where it comes from, but there's a verifiable source where it was originated or where it originated. And that was Magnus Hirschfeld, the Jewish sexologist in Berlin back in the 1920s, 1930s. And his Institute of Sexual Science, like there are crazy articles that are written about how great Magnus Hirschfeld was, about how he issued the first transgender identification cards. They performed the first transgender surgeries, removing body parts. They conditioned children to believe that they were the opposite sex. They
Wow.
distributed pornography, homosexual pornography, things that were given to children, like you see stuff in schools where kids are given basically porn that the parents can't even display at the school board meetings because it's offensive. They police tell them to
Right.
put it down. But that's what the Institute of Sexual Science was doing. And this is where history gets fuzzy because the Holocaust Museum actually says on their website that what the Germans burned in the famous Berlin book burning was that library of Magnus Hirschfeld. That's what they burned. It's very verifiable. Just type in Magnus Hirschfeld Holocaust Museum and you can read it on the front page. It says most of the stuff that they burned was from Hirschfeld's library. So all of this stuff back then, this is what these people were accused of in the 30s. And we're like appalled that somebody would accuse a religious group of promoting this stuff. But then you fast forward to today, and where's the capital of all of this? Back in the 20s and 30s, it was Berlin, overrun by communists and Bolsheviks. And today, it's Tel Aviv. Today, the capital of all of this stuff is Tel Aviv. It's verifiable. It's not a debatable thing. And what we make of that is a secondary consideration. But it's I like to focus on the point that it's really crazily like verifiable. It's not like fringe internet websites and like some pamphlet that some white supremacist distributed. It's like mainline major publications where they're bragging about it because they like to take credit. Like, hey, we promoted feminism. We promoted Black Lives Matter. I mean, even the NAACP wasn't created by black folks. It was created by a bunch of Jewish guys that got together. It's not even a black organization. It's again crazily verifiably documented. So anyway, I might be off point from the question, but Tel Aviv is the capital of all of this, and they brag about it. That's how we know.
Yeah, that's crazy. So why do you think the Jewish people want to do this, all this stuff?
Well, I don't. The thing is, there are different denominations of that religious group, just like there
That's
are any
true.
other
Yeah.
group, right? And there are plenty of Torah reading, Torah following Jews who don't believe in any of this. And again, they get treated just as bad as any quote goyim do. Or you see people that are considered self-haters, like Glenn Greenwald, for example, because he doesn't toe the line and tells people the truth. Uh, but the point is, if you read the Talmudic rabbinical text, there's two of them. I believe the one that's most important is the Bavli. If you read the Talmudic texts, they talk about all of these things. I mean, you could look this up in real time right now. Just type in the eight. There's two different versions of it, but there's the set. You could type in the seven or the eight genders of the Talmud. Just type that in, seven or eight genders of the Talmud. And the Talmud teaches there are seven or eight genders. But the thing is, those aren't like literal, they're not supposed to be interpreted as literal genders. They're supposed to be interpreted kind of like we interpret Baphomet. Baphomet is masculine and feminine. It's not a like a physical transgender character. All humans are masculine and feminine. I mean, even men have breasts, right? We have attributes of what some might refer to as the divine masculine or the divine feminine. That's in all of us, and it's only a few little tiny things that separate men from women. They're big things, but so we all come from a central, source. That's the idea. And so they're in the Talmud when they're talking about different genders. I don't think it's supposed to be interpreted as two spirit and pansexual and stuff like that. But that's the ideology that has developed out of a literal interpretation of the idea that there are multiple genders. At least that's my assessment of it. I could be wrong and it could be worse. It could be that it literally is teaching that there are multiple genders, but I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt and think that it's a misinterpretation of these mystical texts and what they're supposed to mean. But the point is, the Quran doesn't teach this. The Bible doesn't teach this, but the Talmud does teach this. That's where it comes from. And so the radicals in that religion clearly are utilizing those texts because they believe that that's the way to their salvation, to their Messiah. It's part of the way in which, like we talked about earlier, they can destroy families, they can destroy cultures and civilizations because that's the way that they bring about their Messiah and that's the way they get saved. And if you're Jewish in the way of that, they'll cast you into the fire too. In
Yeah.
fact, that's been done historically.
How has that been done historically?
Great question. If you look at, and this, it's not just Jews, it's the British, the Arabs, everybody. Look at what these two terrorist groups, the Stern Gang and the Irgun, did in the 1930s and 40s. They threatened their own, well, I guess you could say their own people. They threatened Jews. You better go to Israel. You don't want to be the victim of an act of terrorism. The
Yeah.
Irgun and the Stern Gang, they blew up things that killed British soldiers, and the British are the ones that gave them the Palestine part of the Palestinian territory. Wasn't good enough though. They killed British, they killed Americans, they blew up and killed Jews. They destroyed anything and everything because they didn't get what they wanted. These are radical, crazy psychopaths, and they will kill their own people. That's why I'm not the only one that thinks this. I mean, the greatest danger to Jews is the state of Israel. That's the greatest danger to the Jewish community and the Jewish people. It's the Israeli government, and it's the radical Zionist zealotry, which will even put Christian Zionists above actual Jews, because if they support the agenda and actual Jews don't, that's why so many actual Jews get arrested and beaten down in the streets and taken to jail, because they don't support the radical government agendas. And
Yeah.
this is where I think a lot of people don't, like, from my show, I have a lot of listeners who respect what I do, but I don't like that just total absolute anti-Jewish bias that you hear from people like Stu Peters or Nick Fuentes. I think that's really irresponsible. And I think it misses a lot of it, not just the point, it misses a lot of points. But if you listen to the entirety of the information, you find that these people, that people are so they want to protect, got to protect the Jews. Like, okay, but if you want to do that, you're going to have to target the systems that supposedly represent the Jews, because those are the biggest threats to the Jews.
Yeah.
Although we shouldn't be focused on protecting singular groups of people. We should be focused, as Americans at least, on protecting the rights of all people. So that means not advocating for the banning of Islam like some members of Congress are, or saying we should ban Sharia law as if that's not that doesn't exist in the United States.
Right.
And plus it's Sharia law is like praying and giving donations. That's what Sharia law is, but they never define it. But what about the Noahide laws? You can have Noahide laws. That's completely acceptable in the U.S. So anyway, it's a complicated issue. Um, but the point is that you can't break complex things like this down into talking points and expect to have an understanding for it, which is where I personally find the most trouble in my radio career, because most people want talking points. There's a language to it. Like, there's certain things you're allowed to say and people will understand it if you're on the right or the left. And if you deviate from those tracks and touch the third rail, usually you get fried.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So I guess my next question is, why are these radical Jews so powerful and geopolitically? Like how the creation of Israel, maybe you could give us some of the history on that and what your thoughts on why they're so powerful in the United States and across the world.
If you want to focus on that, we certainly can. The issue is probably a lot more simpler than people might assume. Traditionally, and based on religious law, Christians and Muslims are not allowed to engage. They're forbidden from engaging in usury. And usury is, of course, the practice of loaning money at interest. So traditionally, Christians and Muslims have been banned from participating in this type of employment, this type of practice. Jews have not been. I learned this from a rabbi, by the way.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's why Jews tend to run the financial systems. Okay. I thought I got an answer. That makes sense. I'm going to tell people that. And of course, you're met with vitriol and hatred. It's like, but I learned that from a rabbi, first of all. And second of all, it's like verifiable. Even the Bible, it's in the Bible too. The Quran says that Muslims are banned from practicing. In fact, the Quran condemns usury, the practice of usury, to being like a damnable offense. Like, you will burn eternally for engaging in this kind of corrupt practice. So the Jews don't. That's the bottom line. And the bottom line below that line is if the fine print is if you control the economic systems, you basically have control of everything. I mean, you can buy the media, you
Yeah.
can run the porn industry, you can buy off politicians, you can pretty much do anything and everything. And if you have control of the banks and you have control of the media for and entertainment, which is what most media is, it's just entertainment. If you have control of these things, you've got control of everything. You've got control of the finances and the perceptions of the public. You don't need to control anything else. That's it. And on the subject of the media, it's the same thing with usury. Why are most entertainment, movies, TV, music, etc., why is most entertainment run by Jews? It's the same reason, because Christians and Muslims were traditionally forbidden from engaging in certain types of those practices because they were seen as obscene.
Yeah.
So if Christians and Muslims traditionally, at least in this part of the world, were forbidden from engaging in usury and forbidden from engaging in theatrical practices, and Jews weren't, that's why they tend to run banks and tend to run Hollywood. It's just like a historical fact. And I think understanding that is just a neutral thing. It doesn't even imply conspiracy. It's like based on religious law and religious prescriptions. And you can take and make of that what you will, but I think that just answers the question simply. You control the banks, you control the media. It's based on religious law and a long history of others being forbidden from engaging in those practices. You basically control society. That's it. There are lots of various denominations of tyrants and tyranny that use the same tactics, and they're certainly not all, quote, Jewish. There are lots of people that use the same types of tactics. I mean, consider, for example, consider what's happening in the United States. Consider what's happening in the United States with censorship. It's not a new thing at all by any means, but censorship of what you can do on social media, what you can say, what you can do, without being throttled back or being removed or being banned.
Right.
Under Democrats, they did this to conservatives. Now, under quote conservatives, they want to do this to Democrats. It's both. It goes both ways. Under the Trump administration, in particular, they've really targeted individuals who have opinions that are not kosher about Israel. Right,
Right.
and we've seen this from the ADL to the White House and everything in between. Members of Congress like Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene as well. I'm not even a fan of her. Just like objectively, she says, "Hey, APAC controls Congress." Suddenly, she's enemy number two behind Massey. So
Oh,
the point is, when you see those kinds of things happening, you can identify, okay, the ADL's behind a lot of this. Not so much in China. In China, I saw a story about a journalist who uncovered legitimate corruption, like legitimate stuff happening in the Chinese government that they didn't want exposed, and they just blacklisted him. Couldn't buy a train ticket. Couldn't. I don't think any of his. I couldn't buy a house. Like I think he just had to kind of roam around until they took him off the list. And that's not quote radical Jews doing that. That's tyrants doing that.
that's
So
true.
it's the same tactics are being used by tyrants, people that want control, and that one group is just one of many groups who want to do those kinds of things.
So you think they're gonna battle it out then to get the new world order thing where there's one country?
I don't know how that's going to go down, but it does seem like we're stepping in that direction a little quicker. For a while, I thought, oh, that's not going to happen, and then I realized, oh, it is happening. It's just not happening in the way that we thought maybe it was going to happen. I don't think there's going to be like some declaration of today we're starting a new world order, and there's not going to be borders for countries. Like we still technically have borders in the United States, right? But does that stop people that control the borders from basically keeping them wide open? Like, no. So, like, you can have a border and you can see, like, on a map, there's also a border, but ultimately, there really are no borders because they don't enforce them. So, I think that's kind of how this is brought about. And even when the president was joking about maybe we'll make a union with Canada. I mean, that was the New World Order plan, right? The North American Union. Like,
Right.
just even teasing that idea, I don't consider that trolling. I consider that almost like a test case of like how would the public respond if we did just merge with Canada? what is the public going to do? And really, you're not going to be able to do anything. I mean, look at the way the World Economic Forum has infiltrated virtually every country in the world. Even over here in Japan, the prime minister just resigned, and at least one of the four, I think there's four major potential candidates to replace him. One of them, the one of the front leaders, is a World Economic Forum puppet. It's
Yeah.
like they've literally infiltrated every substantially powerful country. It's going to come about in ways we don't imagine and don't think, and we're already a lot closer to it than we probably like to admit. But I don't know how it's going to come about, but it'll be different than what we assume.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I would just like to say thank you, Ryan, for making this video with me. I'm going to share your website again so everybody could see it. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about your website and how people can support you and your channel?
Yeah, so my show, as you said earlier, has been on air for 15 years, and my show airs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I've been on a large variety of websites, of streaming platforms, of terrestrial radio initially when I first began. And now I am solely independent, and you can catch the show really no matter where you are in the world. I don't think any of the platforms are restricted. So anywhere you are in the world, you can catch the show. There's a archive on the website. It's totally free. You can listen to all the episodes. They have ads in them. If you don't like the ads, you can subscribe to the ad-free version of the show. You get my books, you get document archive access, you get other things as well. I try to keep it really simple, really straightforward. Pretty simple website to navigate. But yeah, you can find the show TST Radio on pretty much any platform, or type in thesecretteachings.info for the website.
Yeah, that's definitely great, Ryan. And just thank you again for coming on the show. And I definitely would like you to come on the show again if you're available. And just thank you to all the viewers who are watching this video. Please share it with your friends, subscribe, and thank you. And thanks again, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'd like to do it again.
Awesome.